What if the richest man in the world just discovered the secret to never aging? Sounds like a wild sci-fi pitch or the beginning of a late-night conspiracy video, right? But that exact question exploded across Reddit and YouTube forums after a podcast episode aired on a random Tuesday evening in March. Elon Musk, yes, that Elon, dropped a sentence so out of pocket that the world had no idea if he was joking, testing a theory, or starting a new biotech company. There are 3 foods, and if you eat them consistently after age 60, you'll not only slow aging, you might reverse it, Musk had said, casually, while sipping what looked suspiciously like a smoothie that definitely wasn't just kale and protein. Then he winked. Literally winked. And moved on like he hadn't just dropped a health bomb on the entire planet. Twitter went feral. TikTok wellness bros stitched the clip with titles like, Musk's Miracle Diet, and, Eat This, Don't Die. But for one man sitting in a tiny apartment in Sacramento, California, that clip didn't just go viral, it went personal. His name was George Miller. 63 years old, ex-Tesla engineer, divorced, semi-retired, and quietly, maybe even unknowingly, losing the will to live. George had worked on the original Model S team, back when Tesla was more idea than empire. He'd shared cold coffees and burning midnight oil with Musk in the early days, coding firmware while dodging production chaos. But a decade later, Tesla soared while George flatlined. First his wife left, tired of his obsession with work. Then his knees went. Then his cholesterol. Then, his job. Downsized, replaced, irrelevant. And now, George spent most days doing what a lot of lonely men over 60 do, watching YouTube with a half-eaten banana, checking blood pressure numbers like they were stock tickers, and wondering how the hell time had passed so fast. That's when he saw it, the clip. The thumbnail showed Musk's signature half-smile, with bold white text, 3 foods that rebuild muscle and brain after 60. George clicked. And rewound. And rewatched. Again and again. Was it a joke? Elon had said wild things before, colonizing Mars, putting chips in brains, naming his kids something unpronounceable. But this? This was different. George knew that look. Musk wasn't riffing. He was holding back. He always got that twitch in his left cheek when he was hiding something. George had seen it dozens of times during product launches. Could it be real? The next day, George did something he hadn't done in years. He picked up the phone and called someone from the past. "Hey, it's George. George Miller," he said into the speaker. A beat. Then, laughter. "Holy crap, George. Haven't heard that name since, what, Fremont?" "Yeah," George replied, trying not to sound winded after climbing one flight of stairs. "I got the invite to the reunion. Tesla HQ. Apparently, Elon might show. You're going?" "I think I have to." The reunion was set for Saturday. Former engineers, product leads, interns, and even janitors were flying in from all over. George dug out his old Tesla hoodie, the one with the faded lightning bolt logo. It still fit, barely. But his hands shook as he zipped it up. Not from nerves, but from weakness. A reminder that his body wasn't keeping up with his mind anymore. The venue was sleek, of course. Chrome, glass, AI-powered welcome box. But George wasn't there for the aesthetics. He scanned the crowd of graying techies, then paused. There, in the center of the room, surrounded by a quiet force field of curiosity and cameras, was Elon. Same leather jacket. Same posture like he owned gravity. George didn't even know why he was moving until he stood 10 feet from him. "Elon," he said, louder than intended. Musk looked up. A pause. Then, "George. Holy sh*T. You're still alive." George chuckled. "Barely." Later that night, long after the crowd thinned and the photos were taken, a Tesla intern approached George. "Mr. Miller. Mr. Musk asked if you'd join him for a private toast upstairs. George blinked. Seriously? Seriously. The room was quiet. Just 2 glasses of what looked like non-alcoholic champagne, and a tray of something George couldn't quite recognize. Bright red seeds. A small glass of liquid. A soft chunk of what looked like white mushroom. Musk poured, lifted his glass, and smiled. To the second half of your life, he said. George laughed. I think I'm in my last chapter. No, Elon said, suddenly serious. You're not. I've been experimenting. Quietly. 3 foods. Lion's mane. Sardines. Pomegranate. Taken consistently over time, the data we're seeing is insane. Muscle recovery. Brain elasticity. Mitochondrial rejuvenation. It's not a cure. But it's a shift. George stared at him. You're saying this is real? Elon didn't answer. He just nodded toward the tray. Eat, he said. Then decide. That night, George didn't sleep. Not from insomnia, but from something else. A fire. A curiosity. A kind of spark he hadn't felt since debugging firmware in 2009 at 3 a.m. with nothing but coffee and adrenaline. If Musk wasn't lying, if this was even half real, it meant everything he thought about aging might be wrong. And maybe, just maybe, his story wasn't over. If you asked George Miller when life started going downhill, he wouldn't point to a specific day. It wasn't the moment his wife left, or the day he was let go from Tesla. It wasn't when he slipped in the shower and realized he didn't have the strength to stand up without grabbing the rail. No, his descent wasn't dramatic. It was gradual. Like a tire losing air. George had always been sharp. He was the guy you called when code broke at 2 a.m. and the entire team was in panic mode. A problem solver. A builder. A man with a mission. But missions end. Code gets replaced. And people, especially older ones, get forgotten. After leaving Tesla in his early 50s, George tried consulting. Startups wanted his expertise, sure, but not his pace. Younger engineers looked at him like he was a relic. They spoke in acronyms he didn't recognize, moved faster, slept less. One even called him OG, short for old guy, probably meant as a compliment. It didn't feel like one. By the time he was 60, George was living alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in Sacramento, his world reduced to a daily loop: wake up sore, microwave oatmeal, watch YouTube videos, check blood pressure, and scroll through news feeds that made him feel both terrified and invisible. He had a daughter, somewhere in Seattle. Emily. She texted on his birthday and sometimes sent photos of his granddaughter, Lily. But she was busy. Or maybe he was just hard to be around. He couldn't remember the last time they'd had a real conversation. Loneliness doesn't hit all at once. It seeps in slowly, like fog through an open window. George had grown used to it. He didn't expect change. He didn't ask for help. He didn't believe in miracles. And yet, ever since that night with Musk, something had shifted. The morning after the Tesla reunion, George sat at his small kitchen table, staring at a blank notepad. The kind he used to sketch ideas on when building circuit boards. But this page wasn't for code. It was a plan. A list of 3 things. 1. Lion's mane mushroom. 2. Sardines, in olive oil. 3. Pomegranate, whole seeds. The Musk protocol, he called it in his head. He looked them up. Everyone had some real science behind it. Lion's mane was linked to neurogenesis. Sardines packed with omega-3s, great for the heart and joints. Pomegranate, full of antioxidants and polyphenol. Sure, it all sounded good, but what mattered wasn't what it promised. What mattered was what it might give back. George was tired of losing. He scribbled something underneath the list. I want to feel alive again. That same day, George visited a co-op grocery store a few blocks away. The kind of place where yoga moms shopped and every label said organic. He picked up a bottle of pomegranate juice, a can of wild-caught sardines, and a bag of dried lion's mane mushrooms. He had no idea how to cook them. Didn't matter. This wasn't about flavor. It was about defiance. He got home and sat at the counter. One by one, he opened the packages. He downed a tablespoon of pomegranate juice like it was medicine. He choked down a sardine, the oil coating his tongue with salt and fish. Then he boiled the mushrooms, tossed them into some scrambled eggs, and forced them down with water. It was disgusting. But as the last bite went down, George smiled. Not because it tasted good. Not because he felt different. He smiled because he had a plan. The first week was rough. George woke up every morning stiff and sore, just like always. No magical burst of energy. No reverse aging. Just the same old creaky knees and morning groans. But something was changing, not in his body, but in his mind. He started tracking everything: food, sleep, mood. He dug out an old smartwatch and synced it to his phone. He watched videos on cooking mushrooms properly. He learned sardines are better with lemon. He even added a short walk to his morning routine. Every step hurt. But every step meant something. By week 2, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. His sleep was deeper. He stopped waking up 3 times a night. He felt clearer. Like the fog was lifting. One morning, while brushing his teeth, he noticed something strange. He hummed. Just a little tune from an old jazz record he used to play with his wife. It startled him. He hadn't made noise in the morning, any noise, since God knows when. He looked in the mirror and laughed. Still ugly, he said. But maybe not done yet. On day 17, George recorded his first vlog. He didn't plan to. But after watching too many health gurus shout into their phones about bulletproof coffee and cold plunges, he thought, why not me? He propped up his phone using a cereal box and hit record. Hey. I'm George. I'm 63. Used to work at Tesla. Now I guess I'm trying something. He held up a sardine can. Elon Musk told me these might help me live longer. I don't know if that's true. But I've been eating them every day, along with pomegranate and some funky mushrooms. And I think something's happening. I don't feel younger. But I don't feel dead. That's something, right? He paused. If you're over 60 and tired of being invisible, maybe try it too. I'm not a doctor. I'm just trying. He ended the video with a wave. And smiled. He didn't expect it to go viral. But 2 days later, it had over 20,000 views. Comments flooded in from other older adults. Dude, I'm 67. Subscribed instantly. Following your journey. My knees sound like Rice Krispies. Ordering sardines now. Your honesty hits hard. Keep going, man. George replied to every comment. Every single one. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a ghost. He felt like a man at the start of something. And deep inside, a thought stirred. Musk wasn't joking. It had been over 10 years since George Miller last stepped foot in a Tesla facility. And yet, the moment the automatic glass doors hissed open and that familiar sterile, electric scent hit him, the metallic tang of innovation, air filters, and faint coffee, he was right back in 2012. That year they launched the first Model S to the public. That year his life still had structure. Now. He stood at the entrance of Tesla's newly rebuilt innovation campus in Palo Alto wearing a blazer that didn't quite fit and shoes that hadn't seen polish in years. The invitation had come through email with the subject line: 10 years of disruption, Tesla legacy team reunion. No RSVP required. Just show up. George almost didn't. But something about Musk's odd statement at the podcast and that short but wild interaction a few weeks ago had started a fuse burning in his brain. If there was a place to reignite something, anything, it would be here. The check-in desk recognized his name immediately. He was given a badge that read: George Miller, Powertrain and Battery Engineering, Class of 2012. And a lanyard in bright red: Legacy Team. Mr. Miller, welcome back, the host smiled. We've got a shuttle waiting. Elon's keynote begins in 20. George nodded, suppressing the unexpected pride in his chest. Maybe this wasn't just a reunion. Maybe it was a second chance. The Tesla Innovation Theater looked like it was built by aliens. Glass ceilings, hovering LED displays, seats that subtly adjusted to posture. George found his spot near the center aisle and took a slow breath. Around him were old colleagues, some balding, others surprisingly youthful, all dressed in that weird mix of Silicon Valley casual and, I still remember how to solder, cool. He recognized a few faces from his days in Fremont. A couple nodded. One gave him a thumbs up. Then the lights dimmed. An orchestral version of Space Oddity played, Elon's signature entrance theme, and the screens flashed images: rockets, self-driving cars, a Neuralink monkey playing Pong, solar rooftops, Mars base mock-ups. It was a futuristic fever dream, and somehow, still only half of what Elon had promised over the years. Then the man himself walked out. Still in a black tee and leather jacket. Still pacing like a TED Talk was beneath him. He paused at the mic and looked around. This is weird, he started, and the crowd laughed. Not because of the event. Because most of you helped build the future, and now you're all like, retired or teaching kids how to code in Montana or something. More laughter. But here's the thing, he continued. We're still building. And the biggest problem of the future isn't cars. It's not energy. It's not even AI. He paused dramatically. It's you. A beat of silence. You're all getting old. Now some chuckles, a few confused looks. I'm serious. What's the point of extending life through technology if the human body's still crashing at 70? What's the point of uploading brains if the hardware, the flesh, is failing by 65? He clicked the clicker. A graph popped up, muscle decline after 60. It was grim. Steep slope. Sarcopenia. Frailty. Disease. Most people think aging is natural. I think it's lazy, Elon said, as only he could. We've been looking at the wrong problems. But what if I told you there were 3 things you could start doing now, not later, that could biologically shift that curve? George sat forward in his seat. No way, he thought. He's actually going to talk about it. Elon raised 3 fingers. 1. Lion's mane mushroom. Helps regenerate the myelin sheath around neurons. Brain fog, memory issues. This helps. A new slide, a white, fluffy mushroom. Scientific citations flashed underneath. 2. Sardines. Omega-3s, calcium, selenium, protein. It's like nature packed an anti-aging multivitamin in a tin can. Slide change, a vintage sardine label. More citations. 3. Pomegranate. Not just antioxidants. It contains punicalagins, yes, real word, shown to reduce inflammation and slow cellular aging. Another slide. And here's the kicker, Elon said, stepping closer to the front of the stage. In a pilot group of 40-plus individuals over 60, we saw, on average, biological markers drop by 10 years within 8 weeks. The crowd gasped. Some clapped. Some shook their heads in disbelief. But of course, Elon grinned, this isn't medical advice. I'm not a doctor. Just a guy who's trying to not fall apart before we colonize Mars. Laughter. Applause. George's hands were trembling. He didn't know if it was excitement, fear, or the sardines he ate this morning. Then Elon looked out over the audience and locked eyes with him for half a second. And winked. Again. After the keynote, guests mingled in the atrium where hors d'oeuvres were served on trays by silent drones. George drifted, listening to old engineers argue over whether solid-state batteries were overhyped. He spotted a few familiar faces, Rick from Thermal Systems, Lila from Design, but didn't approach. His mind was racing. A voice from behind stopped him. Still afraid of mingling, huh? George turned. It was Alan Brooks, once his direct report, now head of battery innovation at some startup in Austin. George smirked. I mingle. I just do it quietly. You hear what Elon said? Alan asked. That wasn't just a stunt. He's doing trials. Private stuff, off the books. George raised an eyebrow. And you know this how? Alan tapped his nose. Let's just say I saw some early data. And you, of all people, might want in. George nodded slowly, heart pounding. Tell me more. Later that night, as George drove back to Sacramento on autopilot, he couldn't stop replaying the keynote in his head. Not just the science. Not just the wink. But the way Elon had framed it. Aging isn't natural. It's lazy. What if that was true? What if his whole life, resigning to decline, medicating symptoms, accepting weakness, had all been based on a broken assumption? What if there was still time? George looked at the road ahead. Then I'm not done, he whispered to himself. Not even close. The message came the next morning. George had just finished stretching out a particularly nasty calf cramp when his phone buzzed. He was still half asleep, shirtless in sweatpants, with an ice pack resting under his back like a makeshift orthopedic pillow. He picked up the phone, squinting. Unknown number, 7:12 a.m. Elon, you free to talk today? In person. No press. Just you and me. George blinked. George, who is this? Elon, don't mess with me, George. You know it's me. George, why me? Elon, because you're not one of the crazy ones. Yet. Meet me at the vault. 11 a.m., use the code you used for the 2010 firmware build. Bring nothing. Tell no one. George sat up, heart thudding in his chest. The vault. That was Tesla lingo for a hidden basement lab under the original Fremont Gigafactory. It had been used for testing prototype powertrains and later, top-secret battery systems. No one outside the original engineering team even knew it existed. Now Musk wanted him there. This was either a hallucination, or something was about to change. The drive to Fremont was mostly silent. George tried to listen to a podcast about brain health and longevity, but the words melted into a background hum. He kept rereading the text. The part that stuck with him wasn't the secrecy. It was the tone. Musk trusted him. After all these years, after layoffs and silence and a decade of irrelevance, Elon Musk, the man who had redefined tech empires, still remembered George Miller as a straight shooter. That meant something. Security at the facility didn't ask questions. They scanned his face, his ID, and wordlessly waved him through. One of the guards handed him a wristband, red and black, and gestured toward an unmarked elevator. Lower level, he said. Only one stop. As the elevator hummed downward, George felt the kind of butterflies he hadn't known since his first big product launch. There was anticipation in his gut. But also fear. What was Elon doing down here? The elevator doors opened into silence. The hallway smelled faintly of antiseptic and new tech. Sterile. Cool. The walls were matte black, and ahead, a thick titanium door stood ajar. Inside was a room that didn't look like a lab, it looked like a spa collided with a science fair. Soft lighting, oxygen-rich air. Touch screens on every wall. In the middle of the room, Elon Musk. He was barefoot, sitting cross-legged on a sleek black yoga mat, drinking something thick and dark red from a ceramic mug. "You made it," he said, not looking up. George stepped in cautiously. "This where you build immortality now?" Musk grinned. "Nah. Immortality's for vampires. I'm just trying to stay young long enough to see Mars with my own eyes." George walked over, taking a seat opposite him. "So why bring me here? Why not?" "I don't know, Tim Cook. Or some Harvard doctor." "Because I don't trust people who wear suits every day," Musk replied. "And because I need someone who actually understands systems. Biological ones now." George raised an eyebrow. "You think biology's just another kind of code?" "Exactly," Musk said. "And guess what, aging is basically a bug." He stood, walked over to a wall panel, and tapped it. The lights dimmed, and a 3D hologram of a human body rotated slowly, data points blinking across its muscles and organs. "I've been working with a team on cellular optimization," Elon continued. "Not gene therapy, not CRISPR. Too risky. But bioavailable interventions, things we can eat, that impact mitochondrial efficiency, reduce oxidative stress, and restore muscle function." George nodded slowly. "The three foods?" Elon smiled. "Lion's mane, sardines, pomegranate. Not random. Not trendy. Tested." He swiped through slides showing test subjects, men and women over 60, who had followed the protocol. Muscle density scans. Resting heart rate drops. Inflammation markers down. VO2 max increases. In a few cases, subjects were clocking physiological metrics closer to age 45 than 65. All this, from food? Elon leaned in. "Not just food. Food done consistently. Precisely. Timed with your circadian rhythms. It's not about magic. It's about inputs." He paused. "You've been trying it, haven't you?" George didn't respond right away. "Yeah," he finally said. "About 3 weeks now." "Noticed anything?" "A little. More energy. Better sleep. Some mental clarity. Nothing huge yet." "That's exactly what I needed to hear," Elon said. "Because that means you're metabolizing it normally. No weird responses. You're the perfect case." George squinted. "Case? For what?" "I want you to be the face of this," Elon said, eyes locked in. "Not as some commercial puppet. I mean real. Authentic. Document your journey. Share what works, what sucks. Be the proof. People trust you more than they trust science right now. Or me." George laughed bitterly. "They trust a washed-up engineer over you. You're the richest guy in the world." Musk leaned back. "Exactly. They think I've got some magic serum hidden away. But you? You're eating sardines on YouTube. That's real. That's human." George stared at him. "So this is a campaign?" "It's a movement," Musk said. "And I want you to lead it." He left the vault with a small package. Inside were 3 items. A medical-grade wearable device for real-time biological tracking. A journal with Musk's initials embossed in silver. A 1-month supply of what Elon called optimized formulation kits, carefully prepared versions of the 3 core foods, enhanced for absorption and measured for exact intake. On the back of the journal was a quote. "Biology bends to consistency. And on the inside flap, in Elon's handwriting. Prove them wrong. Especially the version of you that gave up. As George stepped back into the California sunlight, something was different. Not in his body, yet. But in his mind. He wasn't a bystander anymore. He was part of the experiment. And he intended to go all in. The package from Musk had felt like a weighty promise. It wasn't just a collection of supplements. It was a gateway, one that George wasn't sure he was ready to step through. But when he got home, the desire to try, to really test this, had overpowered the hesitation. The first item he pulled out of the box was a small jar. The label read, Lion's mane mushroom extract, enhances cognitive function, reduces brain fog, promotes neurogenesis. He stared at it for a moment, the shiny gold lettering a stark contrast to his own reflection in the glass jar. The instructions were simple: take 1 scoop per day, either mixed into your morning drink or taken directly. George had heard of lion's mane before. It was the darling of the biohacking community, promoted as the holy grail for those looking to ward off dementia, improve mental clarity, or even regrow brain cells. But it sounded too easy. Too good to be true. Could this mushroom really deliver on all its promises? The skepticism was there, buried deep beneath his curiosity. Still, with Elon's words echoing in his head, George took a deep breath and prepared his first dose. The next morning, after a somewhat restless night spent obsessing over the decision, George stirred the powder into his coffee. The instructions were clear about the taste: mild, earthy, neutral. But when he took his first sip, it was more like a mental experiment than a drink. It didn't taste bad, but it wasn't something he'd order at a cafe. Still, he'd had worse. The first few hours were uneventful. He did his usual morning routine, checked emails, skimmed the news, stretched, everything felt the same. He didn't expect immediate miracles, but part of him had secretly hoped for a spark, a sudden burst of clarity or energy. By mid-afternoon, though, he felt it. It was subtle, but it was there. It started in his mind, a sudden focus, a mental sharpness that had been missing for years. It wasn't a jolt of caffeine, it wasn't the frantic, jittery buzz he'd felt from energy drinks in the past. It was smoother. More like flipping a switch from foggy to clear. He sat down at his desk, feeling the most present he had in a long time. Ideas that had seemed fragmented the day before suddenly felt connected. He wrote 3 paragraphs for a project he'd been procrastinating on for weeks, without the usual distraction of checking his phone every few minutes. When he glanced at the clock, 3 hours had passed. He hadn't realized time had slipped away. He hadn't felt that way since he was in his 30s. Over the next few days, the effects of the lion's mane mushroom started to stack up. His mind was sharper. His attention was steadier. He felt less distracted, less prone to hitting a mental wall when working on complex problems. It wasn't a rush of energy. It was more like the fog in his head had finally lifted. One evening, while watching TV with a cup of tea, he noticed something else. His sleep had improved. He wasn't waking up every few hours with restless thoughts. Instead, when he hit the pillow, he actually slept. And when he woke up, he felt more refreshed. Not groggy. Not disoriented. Just, awake. It was only a few weeks in, but the changes were undeniable. The deeper George dove into his new routine, the more he started reading about lion's mane and its effects on neurogenesis. In the medical research journals, studies showed that lion's mane could stimulate the production of nerve growth factor, NGF, a protein that played a crucial role in the growth, maintenance, and survival of neurons. The scientific community still debated how much of an impact it had on reversing cognitive decline, but the evidence was mounting. As he reflected on his own experience, George couldn't help but wonder if this could be the key to reversing not just the mental fog of aging, but the broader physical decline that had started creeping up on him. Maybe this was the breakthrough that Musk had been teasing all along. That evening, as George pored over his notes, another thought crossed his mind: could it be that Musk was right? Elon's comments about aging as a bug had stuck with him. At first, George had dismissed it as the usual Musk eccentricity. But now, with the mental clarity lion's mane had given him, it seemed more plausible. Was aging really just a result of not addressing the right biological triggers? Or was it a deeply ingrained myth that technology, combined with simple interventions like this mushroom, could finally begin to unravel? George thought back to his years at Tesla. He had spent so much of his career optimizing powertrains and battery cells, thinking of everything as a problem that could be solved through data and trial and error. What if aging could be approached the same way? With the right data, the right interventions, the right consistency. The next morning, George felt a familiar sense of optimism, the kind he hadn't had in years. As he sipped his coffee with lion's mane, the world felt open, filled with potential. It was a feeling he had almost forgotten existed. And that was when it hit him. The lion's mane wasn't just doing wonders for his brain. It was doing something deeper, something biological. For the first time in a long while, George felt like he was truly in control again. Like the path ahead wasn't marked by decline, but by a new chapter of discovery. And just as he set down his cup, his phone buzzed. A text from Alan Brooks popped up on the screen. "Got something you need to see. Private. You'll be interested. Trust me." George glanced at the clock. He wasn't about to sit idly by. There was more to this story. And he was going to see it through. George couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten sardines. Maybe it was as a kid when his mother had popped open a can, and the smell had driven him out of the kitchen faster than a speeding bullet. Sardines were, after all, a relic of his youth. In his mind, they were something that people ate out of necessity, not choice. But here he was, about to incorporate them into his diet as part of a grand experiment. Elon Musk had spoken about sardines like they were the secret to eternal youth. A simple, unassuming food, packed with omega-3s, vitamin D, and calcium. At first, George hadn't taken the idea seriously. But after the success he'd had with lion's mane, the idea of sardines didn't seem so far-fetched anymore. Still, it felt like a test. A test of willpower. Of belief. He stood in his kitchen, staring at the can in his hand. The label was minimal, boasting nothing more than wild-caught sardines in olive oil. Nothing fancy. Just a basic tin. But the promise inside was anything but basic. Elon had claimed that sardines were one of the best anti-aging foods on the planet, providing the body with crucial nutrients that couldn't be easily obtained from other sources. According to Musk, it was the DHA and EPA, the long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, found in sardines that helped improve brain function, reduce inflammation, and promote heart health. And considering George's rising energy levels from the lion's mane, he wasn't willing to discount any food that could possibly continue his momentum. George opened the can. The first thing that hit him was the smell. It wasn't as awful as he'd remembered. The olive oil helped mask some of the fishy undertones, but it was still unmistakable. He took a deep breath, steeled himself, and placed one of the sardines on a small plate. His stomach turned at the sight of the glistening fish, its little bones visible, its skin still intact. The whole thing felt a little, too real. He hesitated for a moment before picking it up with his fork. It felt weird, unnatural, like he was betraying some fundamental rule of his culinary upbringing. No one ate fish whole like this. But then, wasn't that the point? To break the norm. To take on the challenge. With one swift motion, he popped it into his mouth. The texture was firm, slightly oily, but the taste wasn't as overpowering as he had expected. It was salty, with just a hint of bitterness from the fish, and surprisingly creamy from the olive oil. Not bad at all, actually. George chewed thoughtfully, slowly finishing the first sardine. It wasn't something he'd want to eat every day, but it wasn't the horror show he'd anticipated either. Over the next few days, George started incorporating sardines into his routine. At first, he stuck to 1 can a day, as recommended by Musk's team. He added them to salads, mixed them into whole wheat pasta, and even ate them straight out of the can when he didn't feel like cooking. To his surprise, he didn't mind them as much as he'd thought. Sure, they weren't exactly gourmet, but they were filling, and they provided a sense of accomplishment. He was doing this. He was following through with the program. And more importantly, he was feeling it. His skin, which had always been a little dull, was starting to glow. His joints weren't as stiff, and his energy levels stayed steady throughout the day. He no longer hit that afternoon slump that had become a regular occurrence. Even his workouts felt more productive, he was lifting more, his endurance was increasing, and his muscle recovery was quicker. Could it really be the sardines? Elon had promised that the benefits of sardines were cumulative. They wouldn't show dramatic results overnight, but over time, the effects would compound. And as much as George wanted instant results, he knew this was a marathon, not a sprint. But the real test came one Saturday afternoon when George met up with his old friend Alan Brooks. Alan was a fitness enthusiast, someone who'd been following George's journey from the start. They'd been close during the early years of Tesla, but their lives had taken different paths over the years. Alan was still deeply involved in the health and fitness industry, constantly testing new supplements and diets. George had often sought Alan's advice when he needed motivation, and today was no different. Alan had invited George to meet for a hike in the nearby hills. George knew this was going to be a challenge. He hadn't hiked like this in years, and his knees had been giving him trouble lately. But he was determined to keep pushing forward. As they hiked up the trail, Alan glanced over at George. "So, how's it going with the experiment? Feeling any younger yet?" George chuckled. "Actually, yeah. More energy. Less brain fog. And I think these sardines are doing something." Alan raised an eyebrow. "Sardines? Seriously?" "I know, I thought it was a joke too," George admitted. "But they're packed with omega-3s, DHA, EPA, lots of stuff that helps with inflammation, brain function, you name it. I feel better. Stronger. I'm even recovering faster after my workouts." Alan shook his head, clearly skeptical but also intrigued. "I've heard of the whole anti-aging food trend, but I didn't know you were on board with it. Have you tried anything else?" "Lion's mane mushrooms," George said. "That's the first one. And it's been a game changer for my focus. But I think the sardines are helping with my energy and recovery." Alan nodded thoughtfully. "Huh. I'll be honest, I didn't think you'd go this deep into it. I've got to admit, though, I'm curious. How's the sleep?" "Better," George said. "I'm getting a full night's rest now, without waking up every hour. And I don't feel groggy when I wake up anymore." By the time they reached the summit, George was tired but exhilarated. His knees were holding up better than they had in years, and his lungs felt clear. Maybe it was the sardines. Maybe it was the combination of everything he'd been doing. But one thing was clear, he was onto something. When they reached the top, Alan looked over at him and grinned. "All right, I'll admit it. Maybe I'll give those sardines a try. But you better let me know if you start growing fins or something." George laughed. "Don't worry, no fins yet. But I'll keep you posted on the transformation." They both stood there, looking out over the landscape below. George had never felt more at peace, or more in control of his life. This journey was just beginning, and whatever it took, he was ready to keep going. George's experience with lion's mane and sardines had been nothing short of remarkable. His mind was sharper, his energy was higher, and his body felt stronger. But there was still one food left to incorporate into his daily routine, the one Musk had saved for last. Pomegranates. When George had first heard about the benefits of pomegranates from Musk, he wasn't entirely convinced. Pomegranates were known for being nutrient-rich, of course, but George had always thought of them more as a superfood trend than anything genuinely transformative. They were high in antioxidants, yes, and could support heart health, but how much could a simple fruit really do? Especially compared to the more exotic mushrooms and oily fish he'd already tried. But after months of steady progress with lion's mane and sardines, George was willing to try anything. So, he set out to buy the freshest pomegranates he could find. The first time he cut one open, he marveled at the deep ruby-red seeds inside, each one glistening with potential. It wasn't long before he was following the instructions on the small note Musk had sent him with the final food. Pomegranate extract and fresh seeds will be your secret weapon against inflammation. The high concentration of punicalagins, a potent antioxidant, will help reduce oxidative stress and accelerate cellular repair. Focus on a handful of seeds per day, and if you prefer a quicker boost, go for a concentrated juice extract. As George bit into the seeds for the first time, he was surprised at how sweet they were. Tart, but sweet. The burst of juice in his mouth felt like a shot of energy, as if the fruit was somehow alive with vitality. He didn't mind the effort it took to extract each seed from the tough outer skin, there was something almost meditative about it. Each seed felt like a small investment in his future well-being. After a few days of adding pomegranates to his routine, George noticed something subtle but undeniable. His skin, which had started glowing after the lion's mane and sardines, seemed to glow even more now. It wasn't a temporary flush, but a deep radiance that came from within. People at work started commenting, asking if he'd been on vacation, because he looked so much younger. His workout performance continued to improve, too. He could feel his muscles recovering faster, and his endurance during exercise was reaching new levels. And while he wasn't the kind of person to count every calorie, he dropped a few pounds without changing anything else about his diet. The pomegranate had a much more significant impact than George had expected. On the second week of incorporating pomegranates into his diet, George felt a sense of clarity, more mental clarity, but also physical. He had been more consistent with his routine, and the cumulative effect of all three foods, the lion's mane, the sardines, and the pomegranate, was evident in ways he hadn't anticipated. One afternoon, as he sipped a glass of pomegranate juice in his office, he received a call from Alan. "Hey, man, how's the experiment going?" Alan's voice was energetic, as always. "You still feeling good?" George grinned. "Better than good. I'm telling you, Alan, these foods work. They've changed everything for me. My focus is sharper than it's been in years, and I'm recovering faster from my workouts. Honestly, I think the pomegranate might be the secret sauce." Alan was quiet for a moment. "Pomegranate, huh? I always thought that was just some trendy superfood. But you've been on a roll with this whole thing, so maybe I'm missing out. You think it's really making that big of a difference?" "I do," George said, taking another sip of his juice. "It's a game changer. The antioxidants in it reduce oxidative stress, which is huge for cellular repair and keeping inflammation at bay. I'm feeling it all over, my joints, my skin, my brain. I think it's the trifecta that Musk was talking about. Each of these foods works together in ways I didn't even realize." Alan chuckled. "I gotta admit, I'm tempted to try it. You've convinced me. Let's just hope it doesn't turn me into a fruit ninja." George laughed, feeling lighter than he had in a long time. The experiment had started as a curiosity, a challenge to see if these simple foods could really hold the key to reversing the signs of aging. But now, it felt like something more, something transformative. And George wasn't just seeing the effects on himself. He was sharing it with others, and they were starting to notice. That evening, after his workout, George decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. It was a crisp evening, the sky painted in shades of purple and orange as the sun set. He had been feeling so good lately that he wanted to enjoy the moment. As he walked, his mind wandered back to the past few months. He couldn't help but think about how quickly things had changed. 6 months ago, he had been skeptical, tired, worn out, and wondering if this was just how aging worked. But now, he felt like a different person. He was stronger, more energetic, more focused. He wasn't just following Musk's advice anymore, he had become a believer. It was during this walk that the idea hit him. What if this wasn't just about him? What if these foods, this approach, could help other people too? The idea of spreading the word, of helping others regain their vitality in their later years, made George feel like he was onto something big. When he returned home, he sat down at his desk, his mind racing with possibilities. He grabbed his phone and shot a text to Alan. "Let's do this together. Let's share this with others. People need to know how simple foods can change everything. It's not just about living longer. It's about living better. Let's make it happen." Within moments, Alan texted back. "Count me in. We're on." The transformation wasn't just physical anymore. It had shifted into something deeper. George was no longer just experimenting on himself. He had become a believer, and now he was ready to share what he'd learned with the world. The future felt open. The possibilities seemed endless. And this was just the beginning. The weeks that followed George's decision to share his findings felt like a blur. It was as if he had unlocked a door to a new dimension, a world where aging wasn't inevitable, and vitality could be restored through simple, accessible means. He felt compelled to do something with the energy, the focus, and the strength that had come from incorporating the 3 anti-aging foods into his life. And it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who could benefit from what he had learned. Alan was immediately on board. The two of them had met a few times to discuss their plan. George knew he didn't want to just write a blog or post on social media, he wanted to create something bigger, something that would truly make a difference. They brainstormed ideas, ultimately deciding on a community project, a series of seminars and workshops aimed at people over 60, focused on how nutrition could change their lives. It was easy for George to talk about his experience now. The results spoke for themselves. He wasn't just another fitness enthusiast giving advice, he had lived through the struggle. He had been the tired, sluggish person who thought aging was a one-way street. And now, he had become living proof that it didn't have to be that way. Alan suggested that they start small, offering free workshops at local community centers, senior clubs, and even online. They could talk about the science behind these foods, lion's mane, sardines, and pomegranates, and how they were powerful allies in the fight against aging. It wasn't about fancy diets or extreme supplements. It was about real, everyday food. The first workshop was a success, more than George had expected. He had set up a simple presentation, showing the benefits of the 3 foods, and shared his own transformation story. People in the audience were skeptical at first, as most people his age are. They'd heard every new health trend come and go. But George was different. He wasn't selling a product or pushing a new miracle cure. He was just sharing his personal journey. It was after the presentation when the real magic began. People approached him one by one, asking questions, sharing their own stories. Some people had never even heard of lion's mane mushrooms before. Others had tried pomegranates, but they didn't realize how much they could impact overall health. George answered their questions, encouraging them to start small, to be consistent. The whole experience felt empowering. The next few weeks saw more and more people attending the workshops. Word spread. Alan started recording short videos with George, sharing tips about each of the 3 foods. They posted them on social media, and the response was overwhelming. It wasn't just the older crowd, they were getting messages from people in their 30s and 40s who were already experiencing the effects of aging and wanted to stay ahead of the curve. The ripple effect had begun. One evening, a woman named Sandra approached George after a seminar. She was in her early 70s, but there was a spark in her eye that belied her age. She thanked George for the workshop and shared her story. "I've been feeling so tired lately," she said. "I've tried everything, exercise, vitamins, even some fancy anti-aging creams. Nothing worked. But what you're saying, it makes sense. I've been afraid that I was just getting older, and that was it. But maybe I've just been missing the right foods. Can I really try this, even at my age? George smiled, nodding. Sandra, it's never too late to start. I've seen people in their 80s make huge strides by just changing what they eat. If you start small, just a handful of pomegranate seeds a day or a little bit of sardines, it could change everything. Don't think of it as an overnight fix. Think of it as a long-term commitment to feeling better. Sandra seemed to absorb his words. I'm going to try. I've got nothing to lose, right? George's heart swelled. This was why he was doing it, why he felt so compelled to share this with others. It wasn't about fame or recognition, it was about making a real, tangible impact on people's lives. For Sandra, this wasn't just a chance to live longer, it was a chance to live better, to feel more vibrant, to reclaim her energy. As the weeks went by, George received countless stories like Sandra's. People reported more energy, better sleep, clearer minds, and less joint pain. Many of them had been skeptical at first, just like George had been, but they were seeing results. The community was shifting, and they were all in it together. Alan, too, had been transformed. His own experiences with the foods had been life-changing. He'd never expected such immediate benefits from something as simple as incorporating sardines and pomegranates into his daily routine. Alan's enthusiasm for the project was palpable, and he quickly became George's most passionate advocate. One day, while they were planning their next seminar, Alan turned to George with a thoughtful look. You know, George, Alan said, we've been getting a lot of attention with these workshops. Maybe it's time to take this to the next level. What if we started an online course? A guide that walks people through everything they need to know about these foods and how they can change their lives. George raised an eyebrow. You mean, like an actual course? Yeah, exactly, Alan said. We could have modules for each food, go deeper into the science, give people practical tips on how to incorporate them into their diet. We could even include recipes and meal plans. What do you think? George sat back in his chair, considering the idea. It felt big, bigger than anything they'd done so far. But it also felt right. If they could create a structured, accessible way for people to follow this approach, they could reach a global audience. This was the next logical step in their mission. I think you're onto something, George said, his excitement building. Let's do it. Let's take this to the next level. That evening, George sat down with Alan, and they began to sketch out the plans for the online course. The possibilities were endless. As they discussed how to structure the course, what resources they'd need, and how to market it, George couldn't help but feel grateful. He had gone from a man who was aging quietly and losing energy to someone who was now on a mission to help others reclaim their vitality, too. The ripple effect had only just begun, and George knew that if they kept going, they could change lives. The journey wasn't just about aging better, it was about living better, for as long as possible. And with every person they helped, the impact would continue to spread. George sat in front of his computer, scrolling through the emails from the past few days. The responses from their community workshops had been overwhelmingly positive. He had received heartfelt messages from people across the country, each one expressing how their approach to health had changed. Many people were eager to learn more, to dive deeper into the principles George and Alan had shared. The ripple effect was becoming a wave, and George knew it was time to scale. Alan, we've got to take this online, George said, his voice filled with excitement. The feedback's been amazing, and people are really hungry for more. They want something more structured, more in-depth. If we can provide that, we could help so many more people. Alan, who was sitting across from George in their makeshift office, leaned back in his chair and rubbed his chin. I've been thinking the same thing, he said. We've got an audience now, but we're reaching them one at a time. If we put everything we've been teaching into a course, we could make a real impact. And the best part? It's scalable. We don't just help a few dozen people at a time, we could reach thousands, maybe even more. George nodded, his mind racing with ideas. They had already established themselves in the local community. Now it was time to take it global. It wasn't just about teaching people how to eat better, it was about empowering them to take control of their health and live with vitality. He could see it now, the vision taking shape. The first step was clear. They needed a course outline, something simple, easy to follow, but comprehensive enough to give people the tools to succeed. Alan pulled out a notebook and started scribbling ideas. What if we break it down into 3 main modules? Alan suggested. We've got the foundational science behind aging and how the foods work. Then, we can do a deep dive into each food, lion's mane, sardines, and pomegranates. After that, we can focus on practical application, how to incorporate them into your daily life, recipes, and tips for maintaining consistency. George liked the structure. It was clear, and it followed the progression they had already used in their workshops. They would start with the science, which had always fascinated people, and then move into the practical aspects, because the real success would come from applying the knowledge, not just knowing it. Great idea, George said, his excitement growing. Let's also include testimonials. Real people, like Sandra, who have already seen the benefits. That'll help people relate to the material and see that this isn't just some theoretical idea, it's real. Alan grinned. Exactly. People trust stories more than they trust data. Plus, it'll give us credibility. We're not just teaching something we read in a book, we're showing them that we've lived it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. They worked tirelessly to build out the course, with George diving into research to refine the content and Alan handling the technical side, setting up the website, building the course platform, and creating a marketing strategy. They were both stretched thin, but the excitement kept them going. They hired a few experts to assist with creating professional video content, including a registered dietitian who could explain the science behind the foods in a way that was easy to understand. George and Alan knew that the key to success was not only giving people valuable information but presenting it in a format that was engaging and easy to follow. By the time the course was ready to launch, they had built an entire community around it. They had been gathering email subscribers for months, sending out tips, success stories, and sneak peeks of what the course would offer. The response was incredible. Their email list had grown into the thousands, and many people had already signed up for early access to the course. Launch day arrived, and George could feel the nervous energy buzzing inside him. Alan was on a video call with their marketing team, finalizing the promotional materials. They had been building hype for weeks, and now it was time to deliver. George took a deep breath and checked the website one last time. Everything was set. He felt a surge of adrenaline as he clicked the Publish button, officially launching their course to the world. Within hours, the sign-ups started rolling in. The email notifications came in fast, each one a confirmation that someone, somewhere, was about to change their life. George couldn't help but smile as the numbers climbed. This was it. This was the beginning of something much bigger than he had ever imagined. As the first few days passed, George and Alan watched in awe as their course gained traction. Social media exploded with posts from people sharing their excitement about starting the course. They received messages of gratitude from people who had been struggling with their health for years and finally found something they could believe in. One message stood out to George in particular. It was from a man named Rob, who had been following their journey for several months. Rob was in his 60s, and he had struggled with chronic pain and fatigue for years. He had tried countless diets and supplements but had never found anything that worked. Rob's message read, "I've been following you guys since your first workshop, and I finally decided to try the course. I'm only a week in, but I can already feel a difference. I have more energy, and my pain is less severe. I'm starting to believe that aging doesn't have to mean feeling miserable. I'll keep you posted on my progress, but thank you for sharing your knowledge. This is changing my life." George felt a lump in his throat as he read the message. This was why he had put everything into this project. This was the impact he had been hoping for. By the end of the first month, the course had reached people across the globe. From Canada to Australia, from Europe to South America, people were signing up and beginning their own journeys toward better health. George and Alan had started a movement, and they were only getting started. Back at their office, George sat down to reflect on how far they had come. They had gone from a small idea, George's experiment with anti-aging foods, to a thriving online community. The ripple effect had turned into a wave, and it was only growing stronger. "We've done it," George said to Alan, who was grinning at his computer screen. "This is just the beginning." Alan looked up, his eyes twinkling with excitement. "I think you're right. Let's keep pushing. There's so much more to be done." And as George looked at the messages, the sign-ups, and the growing community they had built, he knew they were on the path to something truly transformative. They weren't just changing their own lives anymore, they were changing the lives of people all over the world. The dream they had started to scale was already becoming a reality. The first month after launching their online course was a blur of excitement, nerves, and overwhelming gratitude. George and Alan had seen an explosion of sign-ups. People from every corner of the world were discovering the benefits of lion's mane, sardines, and pomegranates. The course had reached far beyond what they had imagined, from small towns in the Midwest to urban centers in Europe, from the beaches of Australia to the highlands of South America. They had built something big, something that was truly resonating with people, and it was only growing. George sat at his desk one afternoon, reviewing the progress reports Alan had sent him. The numbers were staggering, over 10,000 people had already signed up, and that was just the beginning. There were messages pouring in daily from people who had experienced profound changes in their health after taking the course. Some were sleeping better, others had reduced joint pain, and many reported more energy and a sense of clarity they hadn't felt in years. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive, and yet. "Alan, take a look at this," George said, tapping his fingers nervously on the desk. Alan walked over, glancing at the screen where George had pulled up a new batch of feedback. It was from an elderly man named Charles, who had taken the course in hopes of improving his memory. "I've been following the course for a few weeks now, and while I've noticed some changes in my energy, I still can't remember things like I used to. I was hoping for more improvement in that area. Can you recommend something else?" Alan read the message thoughtfully, then looked up at George. "You can't please everyone," he said, his voice calm but concerned. "But I get what you're saying. We've been getting so many messages about how people are feeling better physically, but Charles's message is a reminder that this isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. Some people are looking for different outcomes, whether it's brain health, emotional well-being, or something else entirely." George nodded. "I know. I think we've focused so much on the general benefits, energy, vitality, reduced pain, that we haven't emphasized that this approach is still a process. It's not magic, it takes time. And some people might not see everything they hoped for right away." Alan sighed. "It's tough. We're offering something real, something that works, but it's hard to manage expectations. Maybe we need to add more information about what people can realistically expect from the course and how they can supplement it." That evening, George sat down to write a post on the course's community forum. It was a simple message to all their students, acknowledging the diversity of their experiences and explaining that while the course had already shown incredible results for many, some individuals might take longer to see changes, or they might need additional support in certain areas. "Dear course members, we've been thrilled to hear from so many of you and to see the positive impact these foods have had on your health. Some of you have experienced remarkable transformations, while others are just beginning to notice subtle changes. Remember, this isn't a quick fix, it's a lifestyle shift that requires consistency. Keep at it, and if you're not seeing the results you hoped for yet, please know that you're not alone. We're here to support you along the way." George included a link to a new FAQ page, where they addressed common concerns, including tips for managing expectations and suggestions for additional lifestyle changes, like stress management or sleep improvements, which could enhance the benefits of the foods they were promoting. The response was immediate. Dozens of people commented, expressing relief and gratitude for the reminder that transformation was a process. Several shared their own stories of slow progress and how they were finding hope in small, consistent steps. But among the messages of support, one stood out. It was from a woman named Maria, who had joined the course from Spain. Her message was brief, but it carried a weight that George couldn't ignore. "I've been following the course, but I'm worried. I lost my husband last year, and I've been struggling with depression. I want to feel better, but nothing seems to help. Is this really enough?" Maria's words hit George hard. He had heard about physical changes, but this was different. This wasn't just about energy or pain relief. This was about someone in pain, emotionally and spiritually, and wondering if something as simple as food could really help. George took a moment, reflecting on her message before responding. "Maria, I'm so sorry for your loss. I can't imagine the weight of what you're going through. While the foods in this course can absolutely help with your energy, mental clarity, and physical health, I want to remind you that emotional well-being is just as important. It's okay to seek professional support for your grief and mental health. If you're not feeling like yourself, it's okay to ask for help. We're here for you, and you don't have to do this alone." George hit send, his heart heavy but hopeful that his words might provide a sense of comfort. He knew that food was powerful, but emotional healing required something deeper, something more nuanced. He hoped that by addressing Maria's needs with compassion, he could show her that healing wasn't just about what you ate, it was about finding support in all aspects of life. The message was a wake-up call for George and Alan. They had been so focused on the tangible, physical benefits of their program that they hadn't considered the emotional and mental aspects of aging. Many of their course members were dealing with more than just physical symptoms. They were facing grief, depression, loneliness, and stress. George knew that these things couldn't be solved by diet alone. So, they made a decision. They would integrate more holistic resources into the course, offering guidance on mental health, community support, and self-care. They reached out to psychologists, counselors, and life coaches who could contribute to the course with videos, articles, and live Q&A sessions. They also started a private forum for students to connect with one another, share their experiences, and offer emotional support. The change was immediate. Over the next few weeks, the community grew even stronger. People were not just learning about nutrition, they were learning how to connect with each other, how to support their mental health, and how to approach aging with a mindset of growth and resilience. It wasn't just a course about food anymore. It was a course about holistic well-being, about taking control of your life in every way possible. George and Alan looked at the numbers again, but this time it wasn't about sign-ups or revenue. It was about the lives they were changing. They had built something sustainable, something that had the power to transform not just bodies, but minds and hearts. They had created a movement, one that could reach the world and help people age with dignity, strength, and hope. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The quiet hum of the office was a welcome contrast to the whirlwind that had been the past few months. George sat at his desk, staring out the window as the sun dipped below the horizon. The world outside was still, but his mind was anything but. He was reflecting on how far they had come, how far he had come. From the small, personal experiment with anti-aging foods to a global community of tens of thousands of people, all of it had unfolded in such a short time. "Alan, come look at this," George called out, a sense of awe in his voice. Alan walked into the room, glancing at the screen where George had pulled up their latest analytics report. The numbers were impressive, but George's focus wasn't on the metrics. He was looking at something deeper, the comments, the stories, and the feedback that had flooded their course forum. "I know the numbers are great," George said, but it's the messages that mean the most. Listen to this one. He clicked on a message from a woman named Helen. I've struggled with depression for years, and after my husband passed away, I lost all motivation. I felt like I was just existing. But after taking the course, something shifted. It wasn't just about the food, it was about taking control of my life again. I started cooking for myself, I joined the community, and I felt like I had a purpose. I'm not fully healed, but I feel hope for the first time in years. Thank you for giving me this. Alan read it, his expression softening. This is why we're doing this. It's not just about the food. It's about giving people something to believe in again. Something to look forward to. George nodded, a lump in his throat. The journey had been about more than just food, it had been about healing, about rebuilding lives that had been broken down by age, grief, and loneliness. And though they had always known that their work was important, reading messages like Helen's made it clear that their impact was far deeper than they had anticipated. As they sat in the office, reflecting on the success they had achieved, George couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. The world had taken notice, and their message was reaching more people every day. But there was so much more to be done. The feedback had shown them that there was an entire landscape of needs they hadn't even begun to tap into. Alan, we need to scale up, George said, turning toward his partner. I know we've made a huge impact already, but we can't stop here. There's so much more to do. More people to reach, more lives to change. Alan leaned back in his chair, contemplating George's words. I agree. But we can't rush this. We've built something organic, something real. We don't want to scale just for the sake of scaling. We need to keep it authentic. But I hear you, there's potential here. We can reach more people. George paused, considering Alan's words. He knew they needed to be strategic in their growth, but there was no denying that the demand was there. More and more people were seeking the kind of message they were sharing, the combination of science-backed nutrition, emotional support, and real-world tools to manage aging. Maybe it's time we look beyond just the course, George said. We could create a membership platform, one that's a community all its own. We could offer monthly live Q&As, personalized coaching, maybe even bring in experts to give talks on different topics, mental health, fitness, longevity. We'd be expanding what we're offering without losing sight of our core message. Alan's eyes lit up. I love that idea. A membership site could build an even stronger community. And we could really offer people what they need to succeed in the long term, not just a course, but an ongoing experience. George nodded. Exactly. We've got a great foundation, but we need to offer more. We've helped people get started, but now we need to give them the tools to keep going, to stay motivated and engaged. Over the next few weeks, George and Alan put their heads together and began working on the concept of a membership platform. It would be a space where people could not only access their courses but also receive continued support as they went deeper into their health journeys. They envisioned a place where people could interact with one another, share their stories, and get advice directly from experts. But as they moved forward, they encountered the challenges that came with scaling. As the audience grew, so did the complexity of the content. They had to ensure that the quality of their material remained high, which meant bringing in new contributors, additional experts, and upgrading their technical infrastructure. They also had to balance their time carefully. While they wanted to continue expanding, they didn't want to burn out. We need to keep the heart of what we're doing, George said one afternoon as they discussed how to handle the influx of new members. People don't just want information. They want connection. They want to feel like they're part of something bigger. We need to ensure that the community remains engaged, not just passive. Alan agreed. We'll need to keep it interactive, Q&A sessions, live webinars, group challenges. And we'll also need to put some thought into content creation. The more people we reach, the more diverse the needs become. We have to stay flexible and listen to what people want. It wasn't just about scaling, it was about scaling with care. They had to make sure that as they grew, they stayed true to their values. They wanted their platform to feel personal, not corporate. They didn't want their members to feel like just another number. Months passed, and the membership platform launched successfully. It offered a variety of resources, live webinars with experts, one-on-one coaching, interactive forums, and group challenges that kept the community active and engaged. The response was overwhelming. Members were thrilled to have a more personalized experience, and George and Alan found themselves managing a growing team to keep up with the demand for new content and support. As the platform expanded, so did the vision for their mission. They began to look into creating more specialized programs for different age groups and health goals. There was potential for a program specifically for people dealing with neurodegenerative diseases, another for weight loss, and even one for those struggling with chronic illness. Their work was far from done. One evening, after a long day of meetings and planning sessions, George and Alan found themselves sitting together, reflecting on everything they had accomplished. "You know, when we first started this, I never imagined it would get this big," George said, sipping his coffee. "But now, it feels like the sky's the limit." Alan smiled, leaning back in his chair. "We've come a long way. But we're just getting started. The real work begins now. We've helped thousands of people already, but there's so much more we can do. So many lives we can touch." George looked out the window, his mind racing with possibilities. They had built something meaningful, something that had already made a difference. But the horizon was vast, and the future was full of potential. "Let's keep pushing," George said quietly, "let's keep making an impact." And with that, they began to plan the next steps, expanding, growing, and refining their message. The journey was just beginning. It had been a few months since they launched their membership platform, and things were moving at a rapid pace. George and Alan had learned quickly that scaling their vision came with its own set of challenges. But there was something exhilarating about seeing their work come to life in such a tangible way. Thousands of members were actively engaging with the content, participating in live Q&A sessions, and forging connections with others on the same wellness journey. But they both knew they couldn't stop here. "Alan," George began one morning, "we've built something incredible with this platform. But I feel like we're just scratching the surface. We've created a space for education and support, but what if we could take it even further?" Alan, sitting across from him in the office, raised an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" "We've talked a lot about how this is more than just a course, it's a movement, right?" George continued. "What if we could take our message to a global audience on an even bigger scale? I'm talking about not just more content, but integrating technology to make the experience even more immersive. Imagine a virtual wellness experience where people can access tailored health plans, engage with experts in real time, and even track their progress in a way that's interactive and personalized." Alan leaned back in his chair, his mind clearly racing with the possibilities. "So, what are you thinking? Virtual events, AI-driven recommendations, a personalized health dashboard. Are we talking about creating a whole new kind of wellness ecosystem?" George nodded, his excitement building. "Exactly. I think we're in a position to push the envelope. We could partner with health tech companies, collaborate with nutritionists, psychologists, and fitness experts, and combine it all into one seamless platform. We could offer something truly revolutionary, a holistic, tech-driven wellness experience that evolves with each user's needs." Alan smiled. "That's huge. And it's possible. We've already built the foundation. All we need to do now is take what we've learned from our members, refine the experience, and integrate technology in a way that feels natural and accessible. It's time for the next phase." The idea of creating a wellness ecosystem was thrilling, but it also meant they had to think bigger than ever before. They weren't just building a course anymore, they were building a platform that could disrupt the wellness industry itself. George and Alan began reaching out to potential partners, technology companies specializing in health and wellness apps, nutritionists with cutting-edge research, psychologists with expertise in aging, and fitness experts who could provide specialized exercise programs tailored to older adults. "We need to think of this as an integrated ecosystem," George said during one of their strategy sessions. "I want users to come to the platform and get everything they need, not just videos and articles, but real-time guidance. They should feel like they're getting a full-service experience." Alan agreed. "What if we could create an app? One that tracks people's health data, things like their sleep patterns, activity levels, mood, and dietary intake. We could use AI to suggest personalized plans and even predict areas where they might need more support. It would be like having a coach, a therapist, and a nutritionist in your pocket." They both knew it would be no small feat. The technology, partnerships, and integrations required would be complex. But the potential was undeniable. With a renewed sense of purpose, George and Alan began to bring their vision to life. They started by researching existing wellness apps and platforms, analyzing what worked and where they could improve. They spoke to health professionals and experts to ensure that their content and recommendations would be grounded in science and tailored to the unique needs of people over 60. The first step was to build a health dashboard, an interface where members could track their progress, log their meals, monitor their exercise routines, and even get reminders about their supplements. They wanted it to be easy to use, intuitive, and focused on a holistic approach to wellness. Each user would have access to personalized recommendations based on their input, whether it was a specific food to incorporate into their diet or a mindfulness exercise to reduce stress. They also began working on integrating AI-driven insights. The idea was that as members interacted with the platform, the system would learn from their behaviors, offering increasingly personalized suggestions. For example, if a user's sleep patterns were inconsistent, the platform might recommend certain foods or supplements that could improve their rest. If someone was struggling with energy levels, it might suggest changes to their diet or even recommend a fitness plan. George and Alan were both energized by the project, but they also faced some early hurdles. Finding the right partners took time. They needed technology companies that understood the specific needs of older adults and could create user-friendly designs. They also had to ensure that the health data collected would be secure and comply with regulations. There were plenty of late nights, meetings, and brainstorming sessions as they navigated these challenges. But they were driven by the belief that they were onto something revolutionary. A few months later, after months of hard work, the platform was ready for beta testing. They invited a select group of users, longtime course members and some of their most engaged students, to try out the new features. The response was overwhelming. Members raved about the personalized dashboard, which allowed them to track everything from their daily food intake to their emotional well-being. They loved how the system suggested meals based on their preferences and health needs and how the platform integrated reminders to help them stay on track. "It's like having a health coach in my pocket," one member, Lucy, said during the live Q&A. "I never thought I'd be able to keep track of all these things, but this app makes it so simple. And it's actually helping me stick to my goals. I feel more in control of my health than ever before." George and Alan exchanged a look of satisfaction. The vision they had worked so hard to bring to life was starting to take shape in ways they hadn't imagined. But they knew this was just the beginning. With the new platform, they had opened the door to endless possibilities. They could create custom fitness plans, expand their global reach, and offer a wider variety of specialized content for different health goals. They were no longer just teaching people about anti-aging foods, they were guiding them through a comprehensive, personalized wellness journey. As they looked toward the future, George and Alan knew they were on the cusp of something extraordinary. They had built a community, created a movement, and now they were revolutionizing the way people thought about aging. The new platform was more than just an app, it was a symbol of a new era in wellness. One that combined the power of technology, community, and science to help people age with vitality, strength, and joy. The excitement of launching their new platform was still fresh in George and Alan's minds, but as the days went by, the reality of scaling began to set in. While the response from the beta testers had been overwhelmingly positive, the feedback from their growing global community was far more complex. The platform had attracted users from different corners of the world, each with their own unique needs, challenges, and expectations. "Alan, we need to talk," George said one morning as he paced around their shared office. "I've been reading through the feedback, and it's clear we've hit a new level of demand. People love the new features, but there are issues popping up that we didn't expect." Alan, who had been reviewing the same set of reports, looked up from his laptop. "I know. Some users are struggling with the personalized meal recommendations, and others are saying the platform's not as intuitive as we thought it would be." George nodded, rubbing his temples. "We've created something great, but it's also huge. It's hard to scale something like this and still keep the user experience smooth. We need to streamline things, but we also need to meet the demands of our diverse audience." The diversity of their community was one of the platform's greatest strengths, but it also posed a significant challenge. The feedback was a mix of praise, confusion, and concern. Some users felt overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information, while others didn't think the platform was personalized enough. The system that had worked so well for the beta testers wasn't as seamless for a much larger and more varied group. George and Alan knew they needed to act fast. Scaling wasn't just about more users, it was about making sure the platform could grow without compromising the quality of the experience for each individual. They had always believed in creating a space where every user felt seen and supported, and they couldn't afford to lose that as they expanded. The first step in addressing these growing pains was to take a deeper look at the platform's technical architecture. The team had initially designed the system with scalability in mind, but they hadn't anticipated the complexities of global engagement. They needed to refine the platform's algorithms to make the recommendations even more personalized, while also simplifying the user interface to make it easier to navigate. Alan spent the next few days meeting with their tech team, focusing on how they could improve the personalization engine. "We need to fine-tune the AI so it doesn't just make suggestions based on data, but also considers cultural preferences, dietary restrictions, and even the regional availability of certain foods," Alan explained during a meeting. "This will help us cater to a more global audience while still keeping the recommendations relevant and practical." George, on the other hand, turned his attention to the user experience. "Let's simplify the process. Right now, there's too much on the dashboard, too many notifications. People are feeling overwhelmed. We need to make it feel like a journey, not a task." They both agreed that the solution wasn't to complicate things further, but to make the platform feel more intuitive, more human. Their goal wasn't just to provide information, it was to empower users to take control of their health, at their own pace. This meant giving them tools, but also space to breathe. As the days passed, they worked tirelessly to implement changes. The tech team worked on refining the algorithms, adding more granular personalization and ensuring the platform could handle global demands. Meanwhile, George and Alan worked on a new marketing campaign, focused on reintroducing the platform with its newly updated features. But there were also unexpected challenges that arose. They quickly realized that expanding their team would be essential to continue providing the level of support their growing user base needed. As their platform scaled, so did the number of customer support tickets, user queries, and requests for personalized help. George and Alan didn't want their members to feel like they were just another number, so they began hiring new team members, including customer service agents who could provide the personal touch that was critical to their mission. "We can't afford to lose the personal connection we've built," George said, looking over a list of potential hires. "We need a team that believes in our mission and is ready to help people through their wellness journeys, just like we do." Alan nodded. "We're not just looking for support staff, we need ambassadors. These people are the ones who will embody our values and make sure our members feel heard." They found a group of passionate individuals who were eager to join the mission. As the team grew, it became evident that George and Alan's role was shifting. They had started as the faces of the platform, guiding the community themselves, but now they were becoming leaders of a much larger operation. Their focus had to shift to managing the business side of things, while also continuing to innovate and lead their team. But with all these changes came a new set of obstacles. As the platform grew, George and Alan had to figure out how to manage their own stress and workload. Long days and sleepless nights had become the norm, and both men were feeling the pressure. "I didn't sign up for all of this, Alan," George admitted one evening, as he looked over a new set of proposals for feature updates. "I wanted to help people, I wanted to make an impact. But now I feel like I'm drowning in the business side of things." Alan, who had been feeling the same way, sighed. "I get it. But we can't do this alone. We need to trust our team, trust the process. If we want this to work, we have to delegate and let people take ownership of certain parts of the business." George took a deep breath. "You're right. We've come this far. We've got an incredible team behind us. Now, it's time for us to take a step back and focus on the bigger picture. We're building something monumental, and we can't lose sight of the impact we're making." The decision to delegate wasn't easy, but it was necessary. George and Alan began stepping into more strategic roles, focusing on partnerships, expansion, and the overall vision of the platform. They had learned that growing a business was not just about building a product, it was about building a team that could carry the vision forward. As the months passed, the platform continued to evolve. The personalization engine became more accurate, the user interface more streamlined, and the community more engaged. The feedback from their members improved, with fewer complaints and more praise. People were finally starting to feel like they were part of something bigger, something that wasn't just about aging well, but about living well. One morning, George received an email from a global wellness organization that had noticed their success. They were interested in discussing a partnership that could expand their platform into new markets, particularly in Europe and Asia. The timing was perfect. George and Alan had already laid the groundwork for their next phase of growth, and this partnership could open doors they hadn't even dreamed of. "Alan, you won't believe this," George said, a grin spreading across his face. "We're about to go global in a way we never imagined." Alan looked up, a spark of excitement in his eyes. "Let's do this." The email from the Global Wellness Organization had been a game-changer. It wasn't just a potential partnership, it was the opportunity to catapult their wellness platform into international markets. Europe and Asia, with their diverse populations and growing interest in aging well, seemed like the perfect next steps for George and Alan. But with this opportunity came challenges that neither of them had fully anticipated. "It's huge, Alan. This is what we've worked for," George said as they sat in their office, reviewing the details of the email. The partnership offered them a chance to feature their platform in global wellness expos, build localized versions of their site, and even offer their services in multiple languages. Alan nodded, his mind already racing. "It's an incredible opportunity, but we need to make sure we're ready. We can't just translate the platform and call it a day. Each region has its own cultural expectations, health concerns, and preferences. This isn't a one-size-fits-all solution." George agreed. "Right. We're not just scaling the platform, we're adapting it to new audiences. We need to ensure that our messaging, the foods we recommend, and the way we approach wellness resonate with each market's unique needs." The first step in their global expansion was to assemble a team of experts who understood the health trends and preferences of their target regions. They hired consultants from Europe and Asia who could help them navigate the cultural landscape. This meant tailoring their content to address specific concerns in those regions, whether it was the importance of traditional herbs in Asia or the rising demand for plant-based diets in Europe. "We're not just offering a product anymore," Alan said during one of their strategy meetings. "We're offering a solution that aligns with cultural norms, respects local traditions, and adapts to the health priorities of each region. We need to show that we understand and value their ways of living." George agreed. "We also need to look into the health regulations in each country. There are different laws governing wellness products, supplements, and even the types of advice we can offer. It's a delicate balance. We'll need to partner with local legal teams to ensure compliance." The complexity of the task quickly became apparent. While George and Alan had built a platform that was both informative and user-friendly, expanding it internationally meant starting from scratch in many ways. They couldn't simply rely on the same content, they had to localize everything. This included the language, but also the tone and approach they took in each region. To start, they began by focusing on Europe. The first major challenge was the sheer diversity within the European Union itself. Different countries had different languages, preferences, and health philosophies. In countries like Germany and the UK, there was a strong emphasis on scientific, evidence-based wellness solutions. In France, wellness was often tied to a holistic, lifestyle-based approach that emphasized balance and enjoyment. "We'll need a team of translators who are also experts in wellness," Alan said, flipping through notes from their European consultants. "They'll need to understand the nuances of wellness culture in each country, not just translate words, but adapt our message to fit." George nodded. "And we'll have to adapt our offerings too. For instance, I've heard that the Mediterranean diet is really big in places like Spain and Italy. We could create specific meal plans that incorporate more local foods, like olive oil, seafood, and fresh vegetables. It's about integrating their lifestyle into what we already do." Meanwhile, Alan focused on the technical side. They needed to make the platform fully multilingual, including everything from course materials to meal recommendations, while ensuring that the AI algorithms could suggest regionally appropriate foods and supplements. This was no small task. Some foods that were considered superfoods in the US weren't as accessible in Europe or Asia, so they needed to be cautious when suggesting dietary changes. As they worked through the European expansion, the partnership with the Global Wellness Organization began to gain traction. They were invited to speak at several major wellness expos across Europe, including a conference in Paris that would give them exposure to thousands of wellness enthusiasts, influencers, and industry experts. It was an opportunity they couldn't pass up. "I can't believe we're going to Paris, Alan," George said one evening as they packed for the event. "This is a big deal for us. The exposure is going to be incredible, and we'll get to network with the best in the industry." Alan smiled. "It's a huge step, George. But it's just the beginning. Once we nail Europe, we can move on to Asia. The potential there is enormous, especially with their increasing interest in anti-aging solutions." As they arrived in Paris, George and Alan were overwhelmed by the scale of the expo. Thousands of people, booths showcasing the latest in health tech, and wellness thought leaders from around the globe. They felt a mixture of excitement and nerves, knowing they were presenting something groundbreaking. When they took the stage to speak, the crowd was attentive, hanging on every word. They talked about their journey, the power of food in aging well, and how their platform was more than just a course, it was a community of people committed to living their best lives, regardless of age. They introduced their platform's new global features, highlighting its potential to bring personalized wellness to people around the world. After their talk, people rushed to their booth, eager to learn more. They connected with influencers, potential collaborators, and even some well-known nutritionists who were interested in integrating their advice into the platform. As they returned from the expo, George and Alan felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. But they knew that the real work had just begun. They still had to tackle Asia, a region that presented even more complexities, especially when it came to dietary practices and wellness traditions. They had learned quickly that global expansion was far from straightforward. It wasn't just about translating content or adding more languages, it was about understanding and respecting the cultural values of each region. They had to build trust, adapt to local needs, and be sensitive to how wellness was perceived in each new market. "Asia's going to be a challenge," Alan said as they sat down to plan their next move. "There are so many different approaches to wellness, and they have a deep-rooted history in practices like Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine, and other holistic systems. We'll need to honor those traditions while integrating our own approach." George agreed. "But we can do it. We've already made a great impact in Europe, and if we can adapt our platform with that same level of respect and care, Asia will be just as successful." As they turned their attention toward Asia, they began assembling a new team of consultants and experts who could guide them through the complexities of that market. They knew it wouldn't be easy, but after their success in Europe, they were more confident than ever that their platform could bring lasting change to people's lives, no matter where they lived. The transition from Europe to Asia wasn't just about geographic expansion, it was a deep dive into a world where wellness wasn't just a trend, it was a way of life. George and Alan knew that their platform could help people around the world, but they also understood that Asia's rich history in health and wellness traditions would require them to tread carefully. "Alan, we're walking into uncharted territory here," George said one evening, flipping through notes from their team of consultants in Asia. "This isn't just about food or fitness. It's about a whole cultural approach to health, from Ayurveda in India to traditional Chinese medicine in China. These practices have been around for centuries." Alan leaned back in his chair, contemplating the challenges ahead. "You're right. It's not just about introducing our platform to a new market, it's about understanding these systems and honoring their value. We can't just throw in some content about herbal remedies and expect people to embrace it." George nodded. "Exactly. We need to build a foundation of respect and understanding. We can't just merge Western concepts with Eastern traditions. We need to find a way to bridge the two." The first step in their journey was to immerse themselves in the traditional health practices that had shaped much of Asia's wellness landscape. They started with Ayurveda, the ancient Indian system of medicine that focuses on balancing the mind, body, and spirit through diet, lifestyle, and herbs. Alan spent weeks reading up on Ayurvedic principles, learning about dashas, the three energies that govern the body, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, and how they affected individual health. George focused on traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, a system that dates back over 2,000 years and uses acupuncture, herbs, and dietary changes to restore balance. TCM was deeply integrated into daily life, with a focus on the flow of qi, life force, and the balance between yin and yang. What's fascinating about these systems is that they don't just focus on the body, they take the mind and spirit into account too, George said, his eyes lighting up. "This isn't just about anti-aging foods, it's about creating a lifestyle that promotes balance and harmony." Alan agreed. "That's the key. If we're going to be successful in Asia, we need to respect that. This isn't just about offering another product, it's about creating a space where people can connect with these wellness traditions in a modern, accessible way." To navigate this, George and Alan sought out a team of experts who could help them integrate Eastern wellness practices into their platform. They recruited Ayurvedic practitioners, acupuncturists, and TCM doctors to consult on their approach. These experts helped them understand the principles that governed wellness in these traditions and how they could create content that aligned with those beliefs while offering practical, food-based solutions. "I think we need to start by offering educational content, something that explains the foundations of Ayurveda and TCM," Alan suggested. "We can't just dive into meal plans and supplements. We need to lay the groundwork and help people understand why these practices are so valuable." George agreed, adding, "And we can't forget about the food. In both Ayurveda and TCM, food is medicine. We need to curate recipes that align with these principles and provide people with options that resonate with their cultural beliefs." As they began working on this, they realized that while both Ayurveda and TCM were deeply rooted in ancient wisdom, there were also a lot of commonalities between these practices and their own platforms' focus on food as medicine. The challenge was finding a way to weave these traditions into their offerings in a way that felt authentic. Their first task was to update their platform's AI to suggest Ayurvedic and TCM-based meal plans. This wasn't as simple as just translating recipes. They needed to ensure that each dish aligned with the specific dasha or yin/yang imbalance a user might be experiencing. For example, if a user had a predominantly Vata dasha, their meal plans would emphasize grounding, warming foods like soups and stews, while avoiding raw or cold foods. Similarly, if a user had a yin deficiency, they would need meals that nourish their body with moistening, cooling ingredients like pears and cucumbers. "It's going to be a challenge to fine-tune the algorithm, but it's doable," Alan said. We can start small, offering a few basic meal plans based on dasha and yin/yang imbalances. Then, as we get feedback, we can expand and refine. George was excited by the possibilities. I love how we're not just creating another platform for aging well, we're building something that's rooted in ancient wisdom. This is about bringing these practices into the modern world in a way that feels natural and accessible. One of the most challenging parts of integrating Ayurveda and TCM was learning how to navigate the language barriers that came with these systems. In Ayurveda, terms like dasha, agni, and prana were common, but many users in Western countries had never heard of these concepts before. Similarly, in TCM, terms like qi, meridians, and yin-yang could be confusing for someone unfamiliar with Chinese medicine. To solve this, George and Alan worked with their team of experts to create an educational series that would introduce users to the foundational concepts of Ayurveda and TCM in a simple, engaging way. They broke down complex ideas into bite-sized pieces, offering video tutorials, articles, and even live webinars with experts to help people understand the benefits of these ancient systems and how they could be incorporated into modern wellness routines. "I think we're onto something big here," Alan said after reviewing the first draft of their educational content. "This isn't just about meal plans, it's about creating a holistic approach to health that honors these traditions. If we can teach people how to live in harmony with their bodies, we're offering something that truly transcends the typical anti-aging message." George agreed. "Exactly. This is about helping people feel better, inside and out. If we can teach them how to balance their body's energy through food, exercise, and mindfulness, that's something no one else is offering." But expanding into Asia wasn't just about food, it was about gaining the trust of a new and diverse audience. To build credibility, they sought partnerships with local wellness influencers, practitioners, and wellness organizations. They connected with renowned Ayurvedic doctors and TCM specialists who could help validate the platform's approach. The goal was to create a community that not only understood but also believed in the power of blending Eastern and Western wellness practices. As they moved forward, George and Alan felt a growing sense of accomplishment. They were no longer just building a wellness platform, they were bridging cultures, creating a global community, and making ancient wellness traditions accessible to a whole new audience. As they wrapped up their first successful year in Asia, they reflected on the journey they'd taken. What had started as an idea to combat aging through food had evolved into something far more profound, a movement that combined the wisdom of the East with the power of the West, all in service of a better, healthier, and more balanced life. The digital revolution had changed the game for wellness. As George and Alan's platform rapidly gained traction, they found themselves at the helm of a global movement. Their mission to combat aging through food and lifestyle wasn't just a business anymore, it had become a community, an ethos, a lifestyle for millions of people across the globe. But with this newfound success came a new challenge, uniting such a diverse community under one banner. From the busy streets of New York to the serene temples of Kyoto, from the wellness retreats in Costa Rica to the bustling markets of Mumbai, their platform had grown to serve people from all walks of life. Yet the question was, how could they bring together people from so many different cultures, each with their own unique understanding of health and aging, and keep their core message intact? George was the first to admit the growing concern. As he sat down with Alan, looking over the platform's user statistics, he couldn't help but feel both proud and overwhelmed. "Alan, look at these numbers," he said, pointing to the screen. "We've hit over 10 million active users. That's an entire country's worth of people, all actively engaging with our platform. But with so many people, how do we maintain that personal connection? How do we stay true to our mission without becoming just another massive company?" Alan leaned back in his chair, thinking carefully. "We've been talking about this for a while now. We've got to stay connected with our users on a deeper level. The world is huge, and wellness is personal, but our approach has always been about more than just selling products or offering courses. It's about a shared experience, a common goal." George nodded. "Exactly. It's not just about anti-aging, it's about empowerment, giving people the tools they need to take control of their health, no matter where they are in the world. As they brainstormed ways to unite the global community, they realized that they needed to adapt their content and outreach without losing their authentic voice. The key, they decided, was creating localized communities within their global platform. They would maintain the universal message of aging well through food, but each region would have a voice of its own, reflecting local traditions and preferences. Alan suggested something that would push their platform into the next phase. What if we created region-specific hubs, kind of like sub-communities, within the platform? Users in Europe could talk about Mediterranean diets, while users in Asia could discuss the best anti-aging foods in accordance with Ayurveda or traditional Chinese medicine. It would still be one platform, but people would feel like they're connecting with others who understand their unique health goals and needs. George smiled. I love that idea. We could have localized wellness leaders leading each community, maybe even invite local experts for webinars and workshops. The beauty of the platform is that it's flexible, and we can personalize it without compromising on the overall message. The first step in building these sub-communities was to create a user-friendly interface that could cater to different cultures without overwhelming users. Their developers worked tirelessly, reworking the website's layout and adding country-specific options. These hubs would allow people to connect, share experiences, and learn about wellness practices that were relevant to their region, while still having access to the platform's core content, anti-aging foods, fitness programs, and holistic lifestyle advice. To kick off the launch of these global hubs, George and Alan made the bold decision to host a live, worldwide event. The idea was to bring together their diverse community in real time, creating a shared experience that would bind everyone together. It would be the first ever global wellness summit, streamed live to every corner of the world, where users could participate, ask questions, and interact with wellness experts from every background. Alan was in charge of coordinating the event, which was no small feat. He worked with teams across continents, ensuring that each region's unique interests and cultural elements were incorporated. For instance, in the Mediterranean hub, they focused on the anti-aging benefits of olive oil, while in the Asian hub, the focus was on balancing qi through food. The goal was to make each region feel seen, while still keeping the event cohesive. George, meanwhile, took charge of inviting some of the most respected voices in wellness, including nutritionists, doctors, and fitness experts. He wanted this event to serve as a cornerstone for their movement, a place where everyone could learn from the best in the field, but also contribute their own insights. The day of the event arrived, and the energy in the virtual space was palpable. George and Alan took the virtual stage, standing in front of their respective screens, greeted by thousands of comments, likes, and shares. Welcome, everyone, to the first ever Global Wellness Summit. George began, his voice steady but filled with excitement. We've built something incredible here, and today, we're not just launching a new feature, we're launching a global movement. Whether you're in New York, Tokyo, Paris, or Mumbai, we're all here for one reason: to live healthier, longer lives. Together. Alan added, what started as a mission to help people age gracefully through food has turned into something much bigger. It's about community. It's about connection. And it's about empowering each of you to take control of your health, no matter where you live or where you come from. The event was an overwhelming success. Participants from around the world tuned in, asked questions, and interacted with the experts. From the moment the summit began, it was clear that George and Alan's vision had come to life. The diverse global community had come together, not in spite of their differences, but because of them. They shared their experiences, swapped recipes, and even discussed cultural nuances in wellness. One standout moment came during a live Q&A session, when a user from India asked how Ayurvedic principles could be integrated with Western anti-aging foods. The panelists, including both Ayurvedic and Western nutrition experts, had an engaging back and forth that sparked real conversation. It was a beautiful demonstration of how East and West could blend to create a holistic wellness experience. After the event, George and Alan sat in their office, exhausted but exhilarated. They'd just witnessed the power of their platform on a global scale. But even more than that, they had united people from every corner of the world in a shared vision of health and wellness. "We did it, Alan," George said, a wide smile on his face. "We created something real. Something that goes beyond just food and fitness. We created a movement." Alan nodded, a contented look on his face. "And it's only just beginning." But the challenges weren't over. As they continued to scale their platform, they knew they needed to keep innovating and stay true to their mission. They'd brought together a global community, but maintaining that connection and relevance would require constant effort, creativity, and a deep respect for the cultures they were serving. "We've just scratched the surface, George," Alan said. "The next step is sustaining this. It's not about expanding for the sake of expansion, it's about creating lasting impact. We've got to stay focused on our mission and make sure our platform continues to evolve with the needs of our community." George smiled, his eyes full of determination. "Let's do it. Let's change the world, one meal at a time." As the Global Wellness Summit concluded, George and Alan found themselves standing on the precipice of something huge. Their platform had grown beyond their wildest expectations, and their mission was clear: to continue evolving and to remain at the forefront of wellness innovation. But the question lingered: how could they sustain this momentum? As they sat in their sleek office overlooking the city, George turned to Alan, who was already staring intently at the data dashboard. "We've got this massive, engaged global community now. But how do we keep it all personal? How do we ensure that every individual feels like they're getting exactly what they need out of our platform?" Alan exhaled slowly, his fingers drumming on the desk. "That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We can't just keep pushing generic meal plans and fitness routines to millions of people. People want, no, they need, personalization. And I'm not talking about, hey, here's a different meal plan every week. I mean real, AI-driven customization that adapts to their goals, their culture, their lifestyle." George nodded, his mind racing. "That's the next step for us. We need to create a platform that feels more like a personal coach, one that learns from the user's behavior and feedback and adapts over time. We need AI that can analyze their progress and suggest foods, exercises, and habits tailored specifically to them." Alan's eyes lit up. "Exactly. We already have a ton of data from user interactions. What if we use AI to analyze that data, predict what's working for people, and then give them advice that's fine-tuned to their needs? It's not just about throwing more content at them, it's about offering content that's relevant." The concept of a truly personalized wellness platform was exciting, but it also raised some significant challenges. For one, George and Alan knew that building a fully personalized system would require access to even more user data. They needed to ensure that they were doing so ethically, respecting users' privacy while also offering a system that felt intuitive and helpful. "We need to be transparent about how we use people's data," George said, his tone serious. "We can't just collect it all and build something without explaining why. Our users trust us. If we're going to take it to the next level, we need their buy-in." Alan agreed, pulling up a draft of the new privacy policy. "We're already moving toward that transparency. We'll make it clear to our users that they have control over their data and can opt out of anything they don't feel comfortable with. But the personalization we're talking about, this could change everything." To make their vision a reality, they brought in a team of data scientists and machine learning experts to help refine the AI that powered their platform. They started by focusing on the most crucial element, the food. By analyzing thousands of users' dietary preferences, food allergies, and aging concerns, the team was able to develop an algorithm that suggested anti-aging meals based on individual needs. For instance, someone with high blood pressure might be recommended heart-healthy dishes like salmon with avocado, while someone with inflammation might be directed toward turmeric-based recipes. "Think of it like a wellness concierge," George said. "Every user gets a tailored experience. The platform learns their habits over time, understands their goals, and evolves with them." Alan was excited but cautious. "We'll need to test it. But if it works, it could create a whole new level of engagement. Imagine if users felt like the platform was an integral part of their daily health routine, like a personal coach they could rely on 24/7. The team worked day and night, gathering user feedback, fine-tuning the algorithm, and conducting A/B tests to determine which features worked best. But as they moved forward, they realized that personalization wasn't just about food, it was about every aspect of a user's life. Fitness, stress management, sleep patterns, mental health, all of these factors influenced aging and well-being. So they set out to integrate all of these elements into the platform. One key feature was the introduction of daily check-ins. Users were asked to log how they were feeling, both physically and mentally, so the AI could adjust recommendations based on mood, stress levels, or sleep quality. If a user reported feeling more stressed than usual, the platform might suggest a series of relaxation techniques or calming teas. If someone was having trouble sleeping, the AI would recommend foods like cherries or almonds that could promote better rest. This is where it gets powerful, George explained. We're not just recommending meals anymore. We're building a lifestyle that evolves with each person. It's an ecosystem. Alan added, and it's all rooted in data. Every time someone interacts with the platform, the AI learns and adapts. Over time, we'll have a wellness program that's uniquely tailored to each individual. The feedback from early testers was overwhelmingly positive. Users loved the idea of a platform that was responsive to their personal health journey. But there was one concern that kept popping up: could the AI be too intrusive? Would users feel overwhelmed by constant suggestions and check-ins? To address this, George and Alan made the decision to offer a customizable experience. Users could choose how much or how little the platform interacted with them. Some might want daily check-ins and constant feedback, while others preferred to engage less frequently. The goal was to give users the freedom to adjust their level of involvement based on their preferences. We need to empower our users, Alan said. We don't want them to feel like they're being tracked or monitored. We want them to feel like they're in control of their own health journey. As they continued refining the platform, George and Alan also realized that the AI needed to respect cultural differences. What worked for one group of people might not work for another. For example, Mediterranean diets focused heavily on olive oil, while in parts of Asia, fermented foods like kimchi and miso were seen as vital to good health. So, they worked with their local wellness experts to fine-tune the AI's recommendations based on cultural diets and wellness practices. We need to be aware of how diverse our user base is, George explained. Our AI has to understand that what's considered healthy in one culture might not be viewed the same way in another. That's why localizing the food recommendations is key. In the end, George and Alan had created something truly groundbreaking. The platform had evolved from a simple wellness guide into a personalized, AI-driven wellness coach that learned and adapted to each user's needs. But even as they marveled at their success, they knew that the work wasn't over. They had built something incredible, but the world of wellness was constantly changing, and they would need to stay ahead of the curve if they wanted to continue making an impact. This is just the beginning, George said, looking out the window with a determined gaze. We've created something personal and transformative. But the real challenge is maintaining this level of innovation. We can't stop now. Alan smiled, his confidence evident. We won't. We'll keep pushing. We've got a global community that believes in what we're doing. We've got to honor that trust and keep evolving. As George and Alan sat in their conference room, the weight of their success settled in. Their wellness platform had reached a level of global engagement they hadn't even imagined when they started. Users were experiencing better physical health, more energy, and were beginning to embrace the anti-aging philosophy in ways they hadn't thought possible. But there was a growing realization that the journey of aging wasn't just about the body, it was also about the mind. Alan, George said, rubbing his temples, we've been so focused on physical health, on anti-aging foods and fitness routines. But we haven't really touched on something just as important, the mind. Cognitive health, emotional well-being, they play just as much of a role in aging as physical health, don't you think? Alan nodded thoughtfully. Absolutely. We know that as people age, the risk of cognitive decline increases, and emotional health is often overlooked in wellness conversations. But it's a huge part of the equation. If you're mentally sharp, if your mind is resilient, that can affect how you perceive your physical health, and vice versa. It's all interconnected. George leaned forward. Exactly. We've been guiding people on how to eat, how to stay fit, but what about emotional resilience? What about brain health? It's time to add a new layer to our platform, one that addresses cognitive function and mental clarity as part of the anti-aging process. To make this shift in focus, they brought in experts in neuroplasticity, cognitive function, and emotional wellness to help guide their next steps. George and Alan wanted to provide users with not only the tools for improving their physical health but also the tools for sharpening their minds and managing their emotions effectively. We've always talked about fighting aging from the outside, George said as they sat with their new team of mental health experts. But now we need to start considering it from the inside too: mental clarity, emotional well-being, and the ability to stay sharp as we age. Alan added, we need to incorporate more than just dietary advice for the brain. We need to offer exercises that help improve focus, emotional health, and reduce stress. Plus, we need to integrate mindfulness practices into the platform. The team began brainstorming ways to implement these new ideas. They realized that just like their approach to physical health, mental fitness would need to be personalized. What worked for one person, say, meditation or mindfulness, might not work for another. Some people thrived on brain-boosting supplements, while others found that staying mentally engaged through puzzles, learning new skills, or even social interaction was key. We can use our existing AI to track cognitive health, just like we do with physical health, George suggested. We can ask users about their mental clarity, how they're feeling emotionally, and suggest exercises that will help, whether it's mental stimulation or emotional resilience techniques. Alan agreed. We could also offer guided meditation and relaxation techniques, tools to combat stress and anxiety, and cognitive exercises that promote neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons. The more we can incorporate this into their routine, the more we're helping them age well, inside and out. The new mental health and cognitive fitness features were carefully designed. Users could now engage in daily brain workouts, activities designed to improve memory, focus, and mental clarity. Cognitive training exercises, such as puzzles, logic games, and memory challenges, became part of the daily wellness routine. In addition, emotional health support was woven in, offering self-care strategies like journaling prompts, gratitude exercises, and stress reduction techniques. But perhaps the most important addition was the mindfulness training. George and Alan knew that mental health was just as much about resilience and emotional balance as it was about brain function. So, they introduced daily meditation challenges, breathing exercises, and ways to foster emotional well-being through positive thinking. We need people to understand that emotional health is just as important as physical health, George said. Stress, anxiety, and even depression can have a profound impact on your physical well-being. If we can help people manage their emotions, it will improve their entire life, mind and body. The reaction to the new features was overwhelmingly positive. Users loved the idea of balancing their physical health with cognitive training and emotional support. One user in particular, Jennifer, an avid fan of the platform, left a comment that encapsulated the shift George and Alan had hoped for. I've been following this platform for months, and I thought I was doing well with the food and fitness routines, but I never realized how much my mind needed attention too. After trying the brain exercises and the mindfulness tips, I feel sharper and more in control of my emotions. I never thought aging could feel this empowering. This feedback confirmed for George and Alan that they were on the right path. They had managed to blend the physical and mental components of wellness into a holistic approach, offering their users the tools to age with vitality and clarity. However, they soon realized that this shift wasn't just about adding new features, it was about changing the way their users approached aging altogether. Aging was no longer something to fear, it was an opportunity for growth, for continuous learning, and for emotional and mental empowerment. We need to keep pushing this idea, Alan said during a meeting with their content team. We've got to make sure that people understand that aging is not a decline. It's a new phase of life. With the right tools, you can thrive in your 60s, 70s, and beyond. We're not just teaching people to slow down, we're teaching them how to step into this new chapter of life with confidence. George smiled. Exactly. We've always talked about aging gracefully, but now we're talking about aging powerfully. Mental strength, emotional resilience, cognitive clarity, it all matters. Our users should feel stronger than ever before, physically, mentally, and emotionally. As the new mental fitness features gained traction, George and Alan reflected on the progress they had made. What had started as a mission to help people eat better and live longer had expanded into a full-fledged movement, one that addressed the mind, body, and spirit. And while they had only scratched the surface of what was possible, they were confident that their platform was on the cutting edge of a new era in wellness. But there was still so much more to do. We've built a great foundation, George said, as they looked over their analytics for the month. Now we need to build a community around this. A community where people share their struggles, their wins, and their journeys, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally too. Alan agreed, we've created a space for them to grow and evolve. Now we need to keep guiding them, evolving with them. We can't afford to stop now. George and Alan sat in the sleek, modern conference room of their company's headquarters, their eyes fixed on the growing map of their global reach. What started as a simple platform focused on anti-aging foods and wellness had blossomed into a worldwide movement. Now, it was time for their next big step. They had built a loyal and engaged community, but George and Alan knew that to truly make a lasting impact on global health, they had to take things to the next level. We've proven the concept, George said, his voice calm but resolute. People are listening. But it's time we make a bigger splash. We need to become a globally recognized authority in health and wellness. Alan nodded, his fingers drumming thoughtfully on the desk. I agree. But what does that look like? What's our next move? George leaned forward, pulling up a presentation on the screen. I've been thinking about it. We need strategic partnerships. Collaborations with medical institutions, wellness organizations, and even major global brands. We need to leverage their influence to spread our message even further. We're on the verge of something huge, and if we do this right, we'll have a real impact on how people view aging and health globally. Alan raised an eyebrow. You mean like working with hospitals, universities, and big wellness brands? Exactly, George said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. We need to position ourselves as the go-to source for aging well. We've got the science, the data, and the community. Now we need the authority. The first step was reaching out to medical institutions. George and Alan both knew that the best way to gain credibility was by aligning themselves with respected health experts. After weeks of outreach, they were invited to present at a major health conference, alongside prominent researchers and doctors specializing in aging and wellness. Sitting at the head of a packed auditorium, George couldn't help but feel a surge of pride as he and Alan stood at the podium. Their platform, once a small project, had grown into a powerful voice in the wellness space. This was their chance to cement their place in the health conversation. The presentation began with an overview of the platform's success in helping users live healthier, more vibrant lives, but George wasn't content to stop there. He knew that what would really set them apart was demonstrating the science behind their approach, how their AI-driven platform was not only improving physical health but also enhancing mental and emotional well-being. As we age, the body changes, George explained to the packed room. But so does the brain, our emotions, and our overall mindset. That's why we've created a platform that addresses every facet of aging, body, mind, and spirit. We don't just tell people what to eat, we show them how to live better, longer, and healthier. Alan added, our approach isn't just about giving advice. It's about using data and technology to create personalized wellness solutions. And it's working. The feedback from our users is overwhelmingly positive, with real, measurable improvements in their physical and mental health. The room fell silent as the crowd digested their words. After a few moments, a hand shot up from the back of the room. But how do you address the skepticism around the role of tech in health? A well-known cardiologist asked. There's concern that AI-driven solutions might replace personal doctors or traditional health methods. George smiled, anticipating the question. That's a valid concern, and we don't take it lightly. Our platform isn't a replacement for doctors, it's a tool to enhance the work doctors already do. By providing real-time, personalized health data, we're empowering users to make informed decisions, improving communication with their healthcare providers, and ultimately supporting better health outcomes. We believe that technology, when used responsibly, can complement traditional methods and create a more holistic approach to wellness. The presentation was a success. The doctors, researchers, and health professionals in the audience were intrigued by the platform's potential to change how aging was approached. The partnership doors began to open. George and Alan were approached by several renowned medical institutions who wanted to explore collaborations, from clinical trials to joint research projects on the efficacy of their platform's wellness strategies. But medical partnerships were just the beginning. George and Alan had bigger ambitions. They knew that to truly become a global health authority, they needed to integrate with wellness brands that had established trust with the public. One afternoon, as they discussed their next steps, George brought up a major idea. What if we could team up with some of the biggest wellness and fitness brands in the world? If we could partner with companies that already have a massive global presence, we could scale our message exponentially. Alan leaned in, intrigued. You mean like companies that focus on fitness, supplements, or even wearable tech? Exactly, George replied. Imagine if our platform was integrated into wearable fitness trackers. Users could track not just their steps or calories but also their cognitive function and emotional health. Or what if we collaborated with supplement brands to create custom anti-aging formulas based on users' data? Alan smiled, realizing the potential of such partnerships. We could offer more value to our users, and it would expand our influence on a global scale. The synergy would be incredible. The team began approaching top wellness brands, and it wasn't long before they secured partnerships with several influential companies. These collaborations allowed them to offer users a more integrated experience, combining personalized fitness trackers, anti-aging supplements, and even meditation apps that all fed into the wellness ecosystem they had created. The results were immediate. Engagement on their platform surged as users experienced a more holistic approach to their health. The partnerships also allowed them to reach new audiences, including those who had previously been hesitant about technology's role in wellness. They were now able to showcase how their platform could seamlessly work alongside traditional health and fitness routines. But as their influence grew, so did the pressure. They were no longer just two entrepreneurs running a small wellness platform, they were leading a global movement. And with that came responsibility. We need to ensure we're staying true to our mission, George said one evening as they reviewed their upcoming partnerships. This isn't just about scaling or making money, it's about changing the conversation around aging and health. We can't lose sight of the people who trusted us in the beginning. Alan agreed, his expression serious. We've got to keep the focus on the science and the data. And we need to continue to listen to our community. We've built something incredible, but it's the trust we've earned that will keep us going. As they continued to expand their global reach, George and Alan knew that they had only just begun to scratch the surface. The wellness movement they had started was resonating around the world, and they were positioned to make a lasting impact on global health. They had the platform, the partnerships, and the data, but more importantly, they had the vision. And as they looked toward the future, one thing was clear, the ripple effect had just begun. Sitting in their now iconic office overlooking the city skyline, George and Alan exchanged a look of both awe and contentment. The journey had been nothing short of transformative. Their platform, born from a simple idea about anti-aging foods, had now evolved into a global wellness authority, touching lives across continents. They had helped millions embrace aging with vitality, mental clarity, and physical resilience. But as they looked back, George and Alan both knew that this was just the beginning. "Can you believe where we are right now?" Alan asked, leaning back in his chair. His voice was a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. "We've come so far, yet it feels like we've barely scratched the surface." George smiled. "It's crazy, isn't it? We've built something huge, something that's changing how people think about aging. But the truth is, the real work is still ahead of us." Alan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" George paused for a moment, thinking deeply. "We've created a movement, Alan. People are living healthier lives, they're taking better care of themselves, and they're starting to view aging as an opportunity, not a burden. But what we've done so far is just one piece of the puzzle. Our goal has always been to transform how society views aging, not just as a physical decline, but as an exciting new chapter full of possibilities." Alan nodded, understanding. "So you're saying we have to go further than just personal wellness? We need to change the cultural narrative." "Exactly," George said. "What if we could not only help individuals live better lives but also help change the global narrative around aging? We've proven that aging doesn't have to be a decline, it can be a time of growth, exploration, and empowerment. But to really make this sustainable, we need to reach beyond the individual and impact society as a whole." The idea of shifting the global narrative was both ambitious and necessary. George and Alan had already made tremendous strides in the wellness space, but they realized that to make aging truly celebrated, they needed to engage with policymakers, health professionals, and communities around the world. "We've worked hard to give people the tools to thrive as they age," George continued. "But we also need to work on changing how societies as a whole perceive older generations. We need to advocate for better healthcare systems that prioritize longevity and wellness, we need to promote workplace environments that welcome people at any age, and we need to fight the stigma that aging means slowing down or becoming irrelevant." Alan leaned forward, excitement growing. "What if we could start a global campaign? Something that challenges the stereotypes around aging and shows the world what older people can really do. Imagine the impact we could have, not just with our platform, but with everyone who believes in this vision." George's eyes lit up. "That's it. We can build a coalition of advocates, scientists, doctors, influencers, and even older individuals themselves who are living proof of how powerful aging can be. We could get media outlets involved, share success stories, and create a wave of momentum that shows aging as a time of innovation, wisdom, and vitality. It's time for the world to stop viewing aging as a problem and start seeing it as a potential." The next few months were some of the busiest yet most rewarding of their journey. George and Alan launched the Aging Forward campaign, an initiative aimed at changing the narrative around aging. The campaign's focus was on celebrating the contributions of older individuals to society, advocating for healthier aging practices, and promoting the idea that aging was an opportunity for personal growth and empowerment. They partnered with global health organizations, influencers, and individuals who had defied the odds, showing that aging could be a time for innovation and achievement. "We're not just building a platform anymore," Alan said, during a team meeting. "We're building a legacy. We're creating a global shift in how aging is viewed, by individuals, by societies, and by businesses." The campaign quickly gained traction. Testimonials flooded in from around the world, stories of individuals in their 60s, 70s, and even 80s who were defying expectations. Some had launched new careers, others were learning new skills, and many were actively contributing to their communities in ways that were once considered impossible for people their age. One such story that resonated deeply with the public was that of Ruth, a 72-year-old woman who had become a passionate advocate for environmental sustainability. Ruth had spent much of her life raising a family and working in education, but after her retirement, she decided to dedicate herself to promoting sustainable practices in her community. She had started a non-profit that worked with local schools to teach children about environmental stewardship, and by all accounts, she was just getting started. Ruth's story became one of the campaign's highlights. She spoke at conferences, appeared on TV shows, and was featured in media outlets around the world. Her message was simple: aging is not about slowing down, it's about finding your new purpose. The ripple effect from the Aging Forward campaign was undeniable. Businesses started to take notice, adjusting their marketing strategies and even their hiring practices to be more inclusive of older individuals. Healthcare systems began to put more emphasis on preventive care for aging populations, and governments started to invest more in policies that promoted longevity and wellness. "We're seeing the cultural shift take shape," Alan, George said one evening, reviewing the success of their campaign. "It's not just our platform anymore. We're starting to see businesses and policymakers embracing the idea of aging well. This is exactly what we envisioned." Alan smiled, feeling the weight of their impact. "It's incredible. We've given people the tools, but now they're taking control. They're living the message we've been promoting all along. We're changing the way the world looks at aging." But as the campaign gained momentum, George and Alan knew that their journey wasn't over. They had ignited a global movement, but there were still countless individuals who needed to hear the message, that aging was not something to fear, but something to embrace with open arms. And with every new story, every new breakthrough in wellness, they were moving closer to their ultimate goal. "We've built something important," George said, gazing out the window at the bright horizon. "But what matters most is the impact we'll leave behind. We're not just creating a platform, we're changing the future of aging. And I can't wait to see where it goes." Alan placed his hand on his friend's shoulder. "This is only the beginning, George. We've laid the groundwork, but the legacy we leave will continue for generations. People will look back on what we've built and see how it all started, the idea that aging isn't a decline, it's a new adventure." As they looked ahead, George and Alan knew that their work was far from over. The world was changing, and with it, the way people thought about aging. What started as a small platform with a mission to change the way people age had grown into a global movement, a movement that would continue to transform lives for years to come. And as they stood together, gazing at the future, they knew one thing for certain: their legacy was only just beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?